Bob.
Okay, thank you. I was really pleased to hear Jerry say that this is not a nostalgia fest, yeah? I mean, principally because I don't think nostalgia is what it used to be. The other reason is that I don't really feel that romantic, that dewy-eyed, when I look back at 1972. My memories are actually quite mixed. See, what you perhaps don't know is that the dockers of this country were on strike from August the 5th right into September. We went from an unofficial strike, which released the 5, Jerry's explained that, they've been imprisoned under the new Industrial Relations Act. We segued immediately into an official strike which lasted 4.5 weeks. So we were on strike for in total 6 weeks. But here's the thing, in the unofficial strike in early August, the 5 days in August, we won what I think could probably be claimed as the most signal and significant victory in the recent history of the working class. Okay, there's no charts for this, you know, top 10 industrial disputes, you know, we don't know it, but it certainly would be my opinion that we took on a central part of a newly elected government's policy and we smashed it to pieces. And then we segued immediately into an official strike on an issue which was actually a lot more easy to win. I mean, you know, success was probably easier to achieve than defeat, and yet the union bureaucracy of the Transport and General Workers Union, who presumably once owned this building, managed to pull it off. They pulled defeat from the jaws of victory, up like a rocket, down like a stick. So, you know, my experience of 72 was mixed. It was euphoric victory and humiliating defeat. And I see the essential difference between the two experiences being this. During the 5 days of Pentonville, what we had was an unofficial strike. With, you know, limitations, but an unofficial strike driven by the energy of a rank and file organisation, whereas our official strike was inert, was passive, was stay indoors and do your garden, and that ended in defeat. Tories thought, I think, and some of you, I'm looking around here, I'm guessing some of you can actually remember 72. You may some of you. Jerry does. I'm doing something. But the Tories actually thought they'd been very clever. They thought they'd finessed it in 72. If anybody looks at the history, there was a kind of bizarre sort of pas de deux dance right through the spring into summer, where it was inevitable there was going to be a clash. But the moment and the circumstances and the context was entirely chosen by the Tories, and they thought they'd been clever. They really thought they'd finessed it. Yeah? They arrested the dockers late on a Friday afternoon. On a Friday afternoon in early August, when the car plants, when the shipyards, when the mines, when all of the kind of traditional bastions of industrial militancy were actually on holiday, they thought they'd been really clever. But of course for us, that presented us with an immediate practical question. How do you respond? How do you fight back? We got the news, it did come as a shock. I remember quite vividly being in our shop steward's office, you know, and you had sort of transistor radios that big, didn't you, you know? And the news comes over that the 5 are going to be arrested, and it was unexpected. You know, it was unexpected. It did, in many respects, come as a surprise, a shock to us. It took us a few minutes, maybe a few seconds, to decide that the first thing we're going to do is get the dockers out. What we're going to do is get the roll docks out. And the simple fact is that in the time it took us to walk from our shop steward's office, the 250 yards to the dock gate, we couldn't get in the fucking dock because there were streams of guys coming out. They'd heard about it and walked out spontaneously. You know, you're reading sort of Rosa Luxemburg and things like that about spontaneous strikes. This is the only one I've ever known in my life. Before we could hit the ships to say, listen guys, they've lifted the 5, or actually they lifted 3. They're lifting the 5, people spontaneously walked out. They knew they had to respond, and they did. So then we decided that we'd not allow the 5 to be arrested alone. So we went, as many of us as we could, probably, I should imagine 300 or 400 of us, went to the site of the actual dispute, which is a place called Midland Coal Store, which is quite strangely now situated deep beneath the deep end of the Olympic swimming pool. Okay, I preferred it then actually. So we gathered there, and the police came along. The police lifted not all 5, they lifted 3 of them. So we've got this practical problem. How do we respond? And this is where you kind of get this creative energy of people. Because somebody said, I know who it was, it's my friend Tony Delaney, said, let's picket the prison. Now, actually, picketing a prison? Picket a prison? What are you going to picket a prison for? I mean, you know, they're banged up, there are bars, there are walls, there's barbed wire. Why are you going to picket a prison? But Delaney just said, let's picket the prison. And of course, spontaneously, we all went there. And that in itself, that moment, actually, I think of close to genius, actually was incredibly important in what follows, because it gave us our ground zero. This is our focus. This is where people can go. And it became, in a very exciting way, at any given time, 2 o'clock on the Monday morning, you know, in the early hours of the Monday morning, there'd still be 5,000–6,000 people there keeping up chants, having discussions. You know, when people talk about, you know, the Festival of the Oppressed, in many respects, the exchange of ideas, this sense of fluidity, this sense of creativity was very important around the prison at that time. The other thing it did, you see, was it actually meant that for the 5 days of the dispute, the initiative was with a group of tightly organised shop stewards, principally from the London docks. To some extent Liverpool, to some extent Hull, but principally it was a group of young, angry, politically conscious men who had the initiative, who could drive the events. So now you think, okay, what are we going to do? It's Friday afternoon, yeah? It's in the middle of summer. We're outside Fleeting Prison. How do we begin to build some momentum? We want them out. How do we get them out? Every single dock in the country has spontaneously stopped work. Now, bear in mind, 1972, for those of you who don't have the advantage of being old, Britain is an island because there ain't no Channel Tunnel. So that alone actually gives us significant leverage. You know, there is no longer any trade because the entire dock labour force of this country have spontaneously walked out on indefinite strike. But we need to go beyond that. We want to build this campaign. So what are we going to do? Where can we go? I'm having the meetings. In a pub, naturally. What are we going to do? Let's go to Fleet Street. Now, you all know what Fleet Street is. I'm not going to mess around trying to tell you, but you know what Fleet Street is. Fleet Street was where they printed all the big national daily papers. So, the decision was that a group of shop stewards, the senior shop stewards, would go to Fleet Street, would meet the union officials, SOGAT officials, and that's SOPA officials, would meet the Imperial Grand Wizard of the chapel, and all these Doctor Who figures who, you know, they had in Fleet Street at that time, and they'd go along and they'd have this discussion, yeah, and they'd pull Fleet Street out. Excellent idea, except it didn't work. They went along, they got a lot to drink, they got a lot of money. What do we need money for? We pick it in a prison. What do we need money for? We got a lot of money, a lot of sympathy, absolutely no action. Now that's the point where again this sense of creativity, this sense of let's do it, this sense of it can be done kicks in, because we've been knocked back. Our first attempt to actually spread the strike is knocked back. So, you know, and it was a significant, humbling experience actually. What are we going to do? Well, one possibility is give up, but we ain't doing that. The next possibility is get organised. And that's exactly what happens next. 2 things happen. The first is this. Where's my little bag? The first is that through the auspices of the Socialist Worker Print Shop, who worked through the entire night, we printed 100,000 copies of this leaflet. Now this leaflet to me is I think it could well be the only one in existence. It's got a scratch. My little girl scratched it, which I thought was a bit sacrilegious. But, you know. And you know, in so many respects, this actually encapsulates exactly the mood and the attitude and the strength of what was going on. There's no argument, there's nothing humble, there's no supplication, there's no, would you mind please if you could find the time. It was, come out. It's an attack on our class. Come out, take action, do something, make history, take it into your own hands. We printed 100,000 copies of this. We printed also bigger copies as posters and went to Fleet Street the next night. But the next night we also went with a loudspeaker van. We also went with people we knew politically, through friendships, through our communities, who were printers, who were on our side. You know, we went with these, and this time we didn't just say, 5 shop stewards, go and meet the Imperial Wizard. This time we said, oh, get your asses down there, engage in any conversation you can. Get hold of people and say to them, this is why you need to take action. It's not an act of charity, it's an act of class interest. And what happened was, it's amazing that we went from paper to paper to paper, and every single one of them stopped work. Every one vote section. The best press the working class in this country has ever got. There isn't a single newspaper published for the next 5 days. And it was from that moment, really, that the campaign built. And I don't really want to go into too much of the detail. But from the Monday, once we picked up the campaign and people were back at work on Monday, we would go in small deputations wherever we could and just say to people, look, this is a moment when basically you have to make your mind up. Yeah? And it's the moment when you need to take action. And we spoke in building sites, we spoke in factories, we spoke wherever we could, to small groups, to big groups, and we began to build the campaign to get the 5 released. Now, there isn't a really, how should we put it, there's no authoritative account of what happened in 72. And one of the reasons for that, I don't know if any of you work in universities, one of the reasons for that is because there are no newspapers. I've just explained why. And what historians do is read newspapers and then regurgitate it and pick up a large paycheck at the end of the month. That's what they do. There are no newspapers, therefore there's no history worth recording. Yeah? But what happened, you know, the best reports we've got is that probably something upwards of 900,000 workers joined this unofficial strike at some point in the 3 working days from Monday until Wednesday. The demonstration we held on the Tuesday, technically we held it at Tower Hill, but if any of you know Tower Hill, it didn't just take place on that site, it spread right through into the World Trade Centre, up to the Minories, you know, who knows how many people were on it, but I'd guess 150,000 upwards, with a mood of absolute determination, you know. The 5 are inside, we are out, we want them out. And this is, you know, in a sense where I'll stop, because in a way I can encapsulate everything we're talking about in one single image, and this story isn't told to big myself up, because I'm aware of how marginal my contribution was to everything. But on Tuesday afternoon, someone suggested that one workplace we'd forgotten in London was Heathrow Airport. Yeah? And so me, a guy called No-Go Georgie Scott, who was known that because he had serious hygiene issues. Okay, and I'm in the car with him all day. Thank you for that. In the summer. Okay, another guy, an SWP engineer called Jim Scott. We drove into Heathrow Airport, the 3 of us, yeah, in a blue Fiat 500 Estate. Now you've got pictures of that. A blue Fiat 500 Estate. We drove into Heathrow Airport. We drove through security. We just absolutely arrogantly, to be truthful, not arrogantly, bumptiously, confidently said, get your conveners, we want to speak to them. Within 2 hours, the baggage handlers come out on strike, and no one was going on holiday anymore. And that, to me, kind of encapsulates the essence of 1972 in the docks. It was about daring, it was about confidence, it was about a willingness, in a sense, to take risks. And that's what we did, and the end result was that by Tuesday afternoon the campaign was building to such a scale that the union bureaucracy of this country, including Vic Feather, who is, you know, one of the more moronic figures of my lifetime, they realised that they had to jump on the bandwagon in order to apply the brake. But this was simply getting out of their control, and they then had absolutely no idea where it went. And for me, you know, the most important symbol of the whole thing was, you know, if you can picture this beat up Fiat 500 Estate, remember the estate there, The most important thing about it was it didn't have a reverse gear. If we wanted to go backwards, we had to put our feet out either side of the car and push it, which wasn't difficult. It's a Fiat 500 estate. How heavy is it? And that, in a sense, to me, encapsulates the whole movement. We didn't have a reverse gear.